Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Atlanta Motor Speedway, the mile-and-a-half track that runs like a super speedway. Last year, we saw very interesting races with the new configuration of Atlanta Super Speedway or Motor Speedway, whatever you want to call it. We saw interesting pack racing on a mile-and-a-half track. And in year two, we saw clean, solid racing and dominance by Fords, in particular, our defending champion, getting the checkered flag. Let's get into all the action at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Number one, Joey Logano, the defending Cup Series champion, dominated Atlanta Motor Speedway, winning the ambetter Health 400, holding off Brad Keselowski, Christopher Bell, Corey LaJoie, and Tyler Reddick for the victory. Logano, the entire weekend, dominant. Won the pole for the race on Saturday's qualifying session, and at the drop of the green flag, that 22, he carried them around like he was the Ford version of Dale Earnhardt Jr. That car was so good out front, and it's so strong in general. The Fords brought their A game this weekend for not just Logano, but the entire Ford manufacturing company for the NASCAR teams. They were very strong the entire race weekend, and Logano was so dominant, leading 140 laps, won stage one. He pretty much led every lap in the first stage. That's how good that car was. Stage two, it was the same thing. He was so strong out front, leading his teammates, Ryan Blaney and Austin Cindric, for the majority of that stage. Then we had green flag pit stops. The running order got shuffled a little bit, but the Penske cars remained up front despite Blaney getting a speeding penalty. But Logano was in control to win stage number two, but they ran out in some lap traffic coming off of turns 3 and 4, and Austin Cindric got the run he needed on the outside of 4 to take the stage from the 22 car. And at the start of the final stage, Logano's team started towards the middle of the field, and they kind of had a little bit of a tough time getting back to the front because there were other guys up there that we hadn't seen yet in the entire race or yet to get out front in clean air with solid track position. Logano was stuck back in the top 20 for the majority of the beginning of the final stage, but by the time some drivers got taken out due to incidents late in the race, Logano found himself back in the top 5, and that car was sure strong. He was trying to get the bottom lane going in those final laps of the race with help from his two teammates, but the top lane was just so well organized at the top, Logano just couldn't seem to do anything. But with 2 to go, coming to the white flag in turns 3, the Toyotas on the outside, Christopher Bell made a move to the inside of Reddick, and that brought the bottom lane with Logano and those guys back up to the front, and Logano was able to pass Bell on the white flag lap, and then going off into turn 1 behind Keselowski, makes a move to the outside, a clean, aggressive move to the top to get by the 6 car. He got the lead down the backstretch and then got catapulted to the front by Christopher Bell, pushing him from behind. Kind of the same thing we saw last weekend when Tyler Reddick on the overtime restart pushed William Byron to the front with a little push down the backstretch off into 3, giving him the clean air he needed to run away from the field and run away with the race win. That's all it took for Joey Logano to seal the deal and win in Atlanta. He's had a pretty storied history of this track. Growing up as a kid here, well, I mean, he was born in Connecticut, but he had spent a lot of his time in the quarter midgets and just living near Atlanta Motor Speedway for the most part with his father, Tom Logano. They had, memories, coming to the races, and he got to run a little midget car here at one point, and of course, he made his NASCAR debut at this track. Well, one of his NASCAR starts here in 2009 when he was a rookie in the NASCAR Cup Series, but Joey Logano, so strong the entire day. His first win of the season, the first win for Ford. They finally were able to get a victory after the first 4 races. It's been all about those bow ties from the Chevy organization. Logano was the first blue oval to bring home the checkered flag this year. And now that he's got a win, I guarantee you more wins will accumulate for this 22 team, because when he wins, he gets red hot. And the defending champion wants to defend his title. So far this year, speed-wise, they've been okay. Last 2 weeks, not really the best results for them with the crash at Las Vegas after they won the pole. They struggled for the most part last week despite getting 11th. This weekend, however, very strong all day long, and they're a victor. So congratulations to Joey Logano and the 22 team on a great performance yesterday. Number 2, Brad Keselowski, so strong, close to breaking the winless streak, but falls up short. Brad Keselowski, his second year with his team that he co-owns, Roush Fenway Keselowski Racing, in the 6 car. Last year at this point, they finished in the top 15, but they suffered a big penalty for something wrong with the car, and they got a big points reduction because of that. 100 points reducted for that, and pretty much was the killer for their season, because after that they really struggled for the most part, and he was getting used to a new team after many years with Team Penske. But at the end of last year, we saw the 6 team in Keselowski begin to surge and start running better, getting better finishes, getting some top 10s, and sometimes contending for race wins. Well, so far this year, the results haven't shown it for the most part except for Fontana. But the speed has been there with the 16 this year, unlike a year ago when he was getting used to the new team and being a co-owner to a Cup team. Keselowski is finally getting some momentum going with some speed in the race cars, not just for himself, but for his teammate and driver Chris Buescher. Last weekend, they could have finished in the top 10 if it wasn't for those 2 late race restarts at the end of the race. He got shuffled from the top 10 back to the top 20. But it was still nonetheless a good result where he ran top 10 all day after not running in the top 10 in any of those Phoenix races last year. This weekend at a track that, again, raced like a super speedway, you could better believe that Brad Keselowski was going to be a contender for the race win because he's a phenomenal super speedway racer. And he was playing second fiddle to the Penske cars the entire race for the most part. But when he got the clean air, that King's Hawaiian Ford was unbelievable. There was speed in that race car. Same speed we saw him have at Daytona early this year in the 500. It looked like Keselowski was going to break the winless streak with the speed that he had. But again, the run that Logano had on the bottom and catapulted himself up to the top in turn 1, giving him the momentum he needed to get by the 6 car. And of course, the push from behind by Bell sealed the deal for Logano, and Keselowski had to settle for second place. But nonetheless, it is still a really good start to the 16 this year, speed-wise and finish-wise. If they get those finishes, they're becoming a top 10, top 15 right now, the way they're running as far as their speed goes. And they could have broken the winless streak yesterday. Remember, Roush Fenway in general, the team he drives for before he became a co-owner last year, they hadn't won since Ricky Stenhouse Jr. at Daytona in the night race in 2017. And Keselowski was so close to breaking the winless streak for them. And Keselowski hadn't won since the spring race at Talladega in 2021. But nonetheless, despite coming up short, he was very pleased with the performance of the team. I guarantee you, if they could start running up front at these other tracks, we could see the 6 team maybe making the playoffs this year and maybe getting a victory. And we all know Brad Keselowski, he's a former Cup champion. He's capable of winning races and capable of contending for a championship once he gets a win and gets some momentum going. It could happen soon if this 6 team keeps it up. Despite coming up short, they did a great job yesterday. Number 3, Corey LaJoie with a career best finish, 4th place at Atlanta. Ever since we turned this track into basically a super speedway for the most part, Corey LaJoie has seemed to benefit the most from this because we ran the spring race last year. He was top 20 for the most part of the entire race. He ended up coming home with a top 5 finish, finishing 5th. That was his best career finish up until that point. Then we come back in July, and he's competing for the race win. Pretty much the entire final stage, he was battling with the likes of Chase Elliott, Ross Chastain, Denny Hamlin, Ryan Blaney, and Eric Jones for the victory. The underdog team, Spire Motorsports, could have won that race, and they were in position to. Battling it out with Elliott on the final lap, they tried to make a move to the outside. Elliott comes up, puts a block, which you're supposed to do to battle for the win. LaJoie gets a little up higher out of the groove, into the wall, and turns around into the pack, ultimately ending a possible career day for him. Even though it was a career race, it wasn't a career finish for him. This race was his career best finish. They ran very well the entire day, top 15 for the most part. Were one of the top Chevy teams that you would see occasionally up in the top 10. At one point, the leading Chevy when others were kind of mired in the middle of the pack with all the jockeying for position going on. LaJoie stayed clean and solid the entire race and came home with a top 5 finish. In general, though, Corey LaJoie is off to the best start of his Cup Series career this year. He finished 16th in the Daytona 500. They were 14th in Fontana, and they were a top 15 team the entire race. They recovered from a spin to get back to 14th. They struggled a little bit at Las Vegas. They struggled a little bit at the start of Phoenix last week, but last time I checked, they actually came back and finished in the top 20. They were a top 15 team all race yesterday, and they came home with a top 5. It's maybe I'm going on a limb, but it might not be crazy if Corey LaJoie keeps his run going and maybe has a chance, if he wins a race, he makes the playoffs. Or if he doesn't, if he keeps running like this, he could point his way in, even though there's still guys behind him that have got to get some momentum going. The Hendrick cars, of course, had the penalty this weekend. They got to be able to bounce back from that. And the sport's most popular driver will still be back soon when he recovers from that injury, and he could win a race. We don't know. But so far, you can't deny Corey LaJoie is off to the best start of his career this year. For him doing it with this small team, the budget they've got, and they're not really your typical Hendrick, RCR, or Trackhouse team, they're still doing a really good job. They're pretty much a top 20 team in the first races that we've run this year. I mean, you got to tip your cap to that 7 team and Corey LaJoie and crew chief Ryan Sparks. They've done an amazing job. They can keep this momentum going. This could be a career year for LaJoie. Number 4, pit road entry. This time we return to Atlanta Motor Speedway, but this time we have a new entrance to pit road. On the backstretch in turn number 3, NASCAR decided entering this weekend because of the way that we ran Atlanta Motor Speedway last year with the high bankings, the narrow groove, and not being able to slow down a pit road in time like we have in the past when we ran the old Atlanta configuration when it was still worn out and, it had a little bit of wider turns at that time. NASCAR decided, let's put the pit road entry on the backstretch apron going into turn number 3. That way, there won't be too much congestion coming up pit road, and we couldn't, they were afraid that if drivers made a pit stop under green flag conditions, this type of Atlanta, we could see some guys pile up and there'd be a big wreck. So moving into the backstretch, a lot of people were skeptical about this, but we had a sequence yesterday in the middle of stage 2 where we had green flag pit stops because the entire second stage was caution free. People made pit stops with about 35 laps to go in that stage. Everyone came down pit road, and some people did it a couple times. The biggest group that actually came to pit road was about 7-8 cars for the most part. But other than that, there was other 2, 3, 4 guys pitting at the same time. For the most part, though, the pit stops I think were well orchestrated, despite a couple penalties to guys like Ryan Blaney for speeding. Kyle Busch had a penalty, I'm pretty sure. Austin Dillon had a penalty. Despite all that, the pit stops were well orchestrated, and we didn't have any major miscues for guys coming onto pit road. Well orderly by everybody. So moving the pit road entry to the backstretch of turn 3 might have been a really good idea for something like this because we didn't see this coming. We thought we would have some cautions that would probably, not allow any green flag pit stops. But I'm glad NASCAR made this move because with that green flag pit stops we had yesterday, it ended up working out, putting the entry on the backstretch into turn 3. So, rare W for NASCAR. I mean, I got to give them credit. They did a really good job making that decision. And number 5, the racing product this weekend. First of all, Saturday was not that fun. Truck race was pretty good. The finish, some guys crashed behind, which you would expect because young guys, a lot of young guys, and not a lot of experience in that race unless if you're Matt Crafton or Grant Enfinger for the most part, or even Ben Rhodes, a former champion. Xfinity race, that was a massive headache. I mean, so many wrecks in stage 1 and 2, I could hardly watch. The one highlight under those wrecks was Josh Williams parking his car in the front stretch because he was upset for NASCAR parking him because he had damage in an incident, and not even one full lap before we get up to speed, a piece of bare bond falls off his car. NASCAR said, you didn't beat the damaged vehicle policy clock, you caused a caution, we're parking you. And Josh said, you want me to park it? Okay, I'll do it. On the front stretch, I'll climb out and say, peace. Thank you to everyone for coming up. I love my fans, but this is not right. That was that was something on Saturday. The rest of stage 2 and the final stage in general was pretty well orchestrated and good racing for the most part. When we had long green flag runs, there weren't many cautions in the final stage. There was obviously some wrecking coming to the checkered flag, which everybody's desperate to win. Austin Hill ended up getting the victory for, his 3rd win of the season, 2nd at this track, and of course, he's a hometown driver at Atlanta, in the Georgia area. I was a little bit worried about the Cup race. Would they behave themselves, or would it get out of control like Saturday's races? Surprisingly, but I'm not totally surprised, well orchestrated, good run race on Sunday. Early part of the race, only one major incident was the Bubba Wallace spin off turn 2 on the backstretch on lap 10. He hit the wall and didn't really become a factor after that. But for the most part, everyone was basically, single file, train at times. Then there would be times where guys would pull to the inside and try to make runs. But for the most part, nobody was getting aggressive out there. I mean, second stage, again, was kind of boring, but it was exciting to watch the green flag pit stops with the new entry to pit road on the backstretch apron. And in turn 3, that was pretty interesting. And in the final stage, the racing, really good. Really good racing. There were a couple incidents. The first big one was Kevin Harvick in his next to last start at Atlanta. Harvicking on the bottom of the racetrack, leading the race. When run behind, you would guess it, Ross Chastain comes up from behind, and Harvick gets spun out into the pack, collecting Josh Berry, who actually was able to continue and finished 18th. Chris Buescher, William Byron, Harrison Burton, B.J. McLeod, they were knocked out of the race. Kyle Busch was part of it, but he only spun and he came back to finish 10th. Harvick, unfortunately, was done for the day. But when you look close at the replay, Ross Chastain never touched the 4-car. The 4-car, the back end of the 4-car, the air that was affected from Chastain being a little close to the bumper, even though he never touched him, the air sent the back end of the 4-car around and into the pack. He never touched him, and obviously, that's what happens when you're drafting this type of racing. if you get too close to a guy's bumper, and even if you're not touching him, especially in the turns, you can get a guy arrow loose and send him around into the pack. That's what happened in that incident yesterday. The second biggest incident, and the final major incident of the day, was Eric Almirola, who stayed out a couple laps earlier on worn-out tires, had the lead, but in turn 4, blew right rear tire, went around to the pack, collected Kyle Larson, who was having a great run, took him out of the race, as well as Daniel Suarez. Justin Haley wasn't part of it, but he continued on. Almirola was pretty distraught on the radio, saying, guys, I'm sorry, you keep giving me fast race cars and these things happen. We're going to get it together eventually. And yeah, Almirola had a good car yesterday, and it sucked that happened. But after that, the final 44 laps of the finish, all green flag racing. Everybody ran hard, aggressive, but clean. And we had a clean finish for the most part. Nobody wrecked coming to the checker flag off of turns 3 and 4. It was just clean, solid racing for the most part. The final 4 laps had me on the edge of my seat. At one point, I'm standing up watching this stuff. That racing at the end was phenomenal. No need to wreck. No need to make out-of-control moves. Obviously, you're going to see guys make moves in the last lap, but for the most part, it was good moves at the very end by everybody trying to jock for position. There was no wrecking. There was no banging. There was nobody really upset with one another for the most part, unless you're Ross Chastain and Alex Bowman. I don't know what that conversation was. Maybe they wanted to try to do something in the last lap and then the plans fell through. But for the most part, the battle to the finish, the battle for the win, in the final 44 laps, all that side-by-side action, just great racing and no wrecks. Round of applause to those guys. Round of applause to everybody in general Sunday. They ran a great race. There wasn't too much, nagging at others for causing this incident or that incident. It was just good racing in general. It doesn't have to be a great race if we keep having constant wrecking every single time like we saw in the first event last year. And we were just getting new to this new type of Atlanta Speedway. This race yesterday, really good stuff. I mean, first stage, okay. Second stage was kind of despite, watching green flag pit stops. Final stage, best racing of the day. It was awesome. Good racing in general yesterday. Round of applause and thumbs up to the competitors for putting on a good, solid show yesterday in Atlanta. Now, we're off to some road course racing for the first time this year, and this is the second race where we have the new short track aero package, where we put this for the short tracks and the road courses to try to put the handle back in the hands of the drivers and hopefully hope for some side-by-side loose cars for the most part. And next weekend, I'm so excited about the racing because we've not only got our road course aces like AJ Allmendinger, Ty Gibbs, Austin Cindric, Kyle Busch, Martin Truex Jr., Ross Chastain, Kyle Larson, and Tyler Reddick duking it out. We've got other guys. We've got Ricky Taylor driving the number 9 car for Chase Elliott next weekend. Well, Elliott recovers. We're going to have Ricky Taylor in the 9 car next weekend. We've got Project 91 making their first start of the season. They're bringing back the Iceman, Kimi Räikkönen. He's going to make his second Cup start after he ran for them at Watkins Glen last year. He'll run them in this car. Jimmy Johnson will make his second start of the season in the 3rd entry for Legacy Motor Club. And we have another Formula One superstar making his Cup debut, none other than 2009 F1 World Champion Jenson Button. He'll be making his debut driving for Rick Ware Racing in the number 15 car. And I'm also excited about the racing, but I'm excited about the broadcast because we've got Kurt Busch, the 2004 Cup champion, of course, retired from full-time action last year because he's still recovering from that concussion from the Pocono qualifying crash. He'll join us in the booth. He's really knowledgeable. He's done this stuff before in expanding trucks and really good about it. But we also got Gunther Steiner, our Haas F1 team principal, joining the broadcast. Of course, Formula One's been known for running at COTA ever since 2012. So I'm excited to hear what he has to say. Just don't use the language that we've seen you in Drive to Survive, Gunther. But we're happy to have you on, my Italian compadre. So what will happen next week? And will we see an exciting finish we saw last year with Ross Chastain and AJ Allmendinger and Alex Bowman duking out for the win with a spin on the last lap and Chastain repeating his win from a year ago? Or will somebody else capture the third, someone different capture the 3rd checkered flag at COTA? We shall see what happens, but hope you all have a wonderful week. Subscribe, like, congrats once again to Joey Logano and the 22 team on their dominating victory at Atlanta yesterday. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Let's go racing!